Hello and welcome to Literacy Matters Empowered Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Lundy Swift. Today's conversation is about equity, not as a buzzword or a program, but as a daily practice that shows up in the smallest instructional moments. It lives in how we teach students to read, how we support them in getting their ideas onto the page, and how we respond when learning is hard. We're joined by Cornelius Minor and Kass Minor, founders of the Minor Collective, whose work challenges educators to rethink belonging, rigor, and what it truly means to honor students' humanity, particularly through our everyday instructional choices. So this is a conversation about the decisions that we make on an ordinary Tuesday, how we interpret a reading struggle, how we respond when a student has strong ideas, but really struggles with handwriting or sentence writing, and how our expectations around transcription can either create access or quietly become barriers. Ultimately, it's about how those everyday choices shape whether students feel seen, valued, and capable in our classrooms. So welcome to the show, Cornelius and Kass.
Dr. Cheryl, we're so excited to be here with you. Yes.
Absolutely.
I can't tell y'all enough. We met you through our associate producer Sam Defas, and she was like, they have got to be on the show. And after just doing a little deep dive on you all, of course, we had to have you on. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
No,
Our pleasure.
it's a real honor. It's such an honor.
Awesome. So we want to get to know you as listeners, right? So we'd love for you to tell us 3 things that we should know about you and your work. Ladies first. Kass, tell us about you.
Absolutely. So one of the things that is central to my work is I'm really good and I support a lot of teachers in finding what's beautiful in the work of teaching and learning. I find that when we prioritize finding what's beautiful, we are really able to sustain that commitment we have to not just young people, but also to ourselves and our stance and, maintain what we believe in.
Ooh,
I'll say something else that's really important to me is that I try to never ask people to do something that I haven't done myself or tried myself. And so that is in a lot of different factors of my life, whether it be at home with my own children, my husband Cornelius, but especially in the realm of teaching and learning for both grown-ups and students. And then finally, I would say a big part of who I am is that I am a maker. I'm a creator. So that extends to more traditional artistic components. Like I make jewelry and I make sweaters and I'm a big fiber artist. But I also love to make curriculum. I love to wield really beautiful instruction and experiences with students and their teachers. It is some of my absolute favorite work.
Wow. I mean, that's super powerful. And you certainly are a maker, and we're really benefiting from all that you make and continue to make. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So Cornelius, what are 3 things that we should know about you and your work?
Well, Dr. Cheryl, I have to brag about Cass just a little bit
Of
because one
course.
of the things that Cass has not told you is that she is an accomplished global educator. Cass has taught on every continent on this planet. We have done work all over the world, and Cass is really the architect. So a lot of what we're talking about today is stuff that we sit and we think about in our living room and we dream up together, and then she brings to life. And so I just needed to kind of put that in the show so that the people could know.
Of
Um, but
course.
but when I think about my own work, and again, much of it we work together, and we've been working together literally like every day of our careers. Cass and I met the day before the first day of school, and as teachers, and so like everything. There is no like Cornelius did without Cass inspired, when I think about my own work, I like to say that I am your nibbling or your grandchild's favorite teacher. And not just favorite teacher because I'm the fun one, but favorite teacher because I'm the transformative one. That I really believe in helping children to realize their vision, and helping them to articulate that vision, helping them to articulate the interim steps along the way, and then helping them to celebrate when they arrive at the finish line. That is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, helping people to walk in their own power. And I would say the second thing probably is I'm a public learner. There is a lot that I don't know, and I celebrate that. And I celebrate the process of acquisition. Like, how do I name what I don't know, declare my intentions, and then put myself on that path, all in public? I think it's really important for
Mm.
children to see adults who know how to do that work. So that they can internalize how to do that work. And so that's a
Yeah.
huge part of my pedagogy. And then I play, like I was one of those kids growing up that my mom used to look at me and be like, boy, you play too much. And I have turned that into a professional asset. I believe in the power of play. I believe in the power of approximation, that everything we learn when the stakes are lowest, and we are allowed to make those mistakes and reinvent and try again. And so I really feel like play occupies a powerful position in my English language pedagogy. So, yeah,
Wow. I mean,
yeah.
this has got to be the most beautiful introduction ever. So thank you so very much.
Wow.
And thank you for reminding us again just how much of a maker your wife Cass is and how you've been able to transform, to use your word, in so many ways across again the world. So thank you for that. I talked about equity at the beginning of the top of this introduction, and you often talk about equity as something that lives in our daily decisions, not as initiatives or programs. So, when equity is working well, could you tell us what it actually looks like and sounds like in a classroom on an ordinary day?
I love that question. One of the things that I often think about when I walk into a classroom, I'm looking at classroom aesthetics, right? And so that is not really a traditional way to assess or evaluate the teaching and learning that's happening in the classroom. But oftentimes, when we know that really beautiful, equitable, really participatory, where the learning is and the instruction is really leveled across the space, is when the kids are buzzy. You can audibly hear them, and for some children, you can audibly hear them wanting to say more, wanting to know more. So they're raising their hands sometimes, but some of them are kind of like roly-poly on the rug, and they're just really proximate to their teacher. They're proximate to the materials. I also see teachers really connected, and not connected in the traditional sense necessarily, but connected in a way where I can tell they're really paying attention to not just the child who has their hand raised, but also to the kids who might be completely silent, the
Yeah.
kids who are, in the back, knocking on the desk, like the whole entire lesson. They're so in tune with all of the ways the kids are presenting, and they're able to really consider how they need to connect the dots to all of those different needs that are manifesting. And so the aesthetic is something, there's this fun word called chaotic, where it's ordered chaos,
Yeah.
literally. And that's usually the definitive part for me, where I'm like, this is a place that is incredibly inclusive, where I can see there's a real equitable experience that this teacher is manifesting, not for her students or their student, but with their students.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
I love that. Cornelius, do you want
Yeah.
to say something about that? I see you're
Yeah, and I think about it all the time. I spend so much time in classrooms. 80% of my school week is teaching. It's in front of young people. And about 2 months ago, this was right before the holiday break, right before winter break. That we had a story week where it was right before the break, and so we would celebrate every morning by reading a new story, and so we would preview the story the day before. And I was with a teacher. We were all sitting on the rug, and she said, "Y'all, tomorrow we about to read about firefighters, and it's about to be crazy. We're about to read." And she was hyping up the story, because you got to hype the story up to get the kids ready. And
Yeah.
she was like, "We're about to read about these firefighters, and they got the most dangerous job, but they go out and they risk their lives every day." And the kids were all leaning forward. They she was advertising this book that we're going to read tomorrow. And right when she got done talking, she was like, "We're about to read about these firefighters. They have this dangerous job. They put their lives on the line to rescue their neighbors." And this little boy, we're in a first grade classroom. This little boy, after hearing that description, he was like, "Damn!" And that is, and that is a completely inappropriate response in a first grade classroom. But
Yes.
here is what that teacher did. She smiled, chuckled a little bit, and said, "How you gonna rephrase that?" And he had to think. And he was like, "I'm really looking forward to this book." And that moment to me embodied everything that we believe when we say equity. That was a moment where she could have made a young person feel like he didn't belong. She could have come down on his head swift and hard and fast, and he would have complied because kids are compliant. But instead, she used that as a moment to engage a 6-year-old in a moment of thoughtful reflection. How are we going to rephrase this sentence? We know you're excited to learn about these firefighters, but this is not the classroom where we yell damn, right? So how are we going to do this, right? And so she was able to reprimand this young person without him feeling like he didn't belong, because so many times kids get reprimanded and then they shut down for the rest of the week or the rest of the year because that lady thinks I don't belong here. That lady thinks I don't act right. That thought never entered his mind. She allowed him to maintain his 6-year-old sense of wonder and excitement while also creating an opportunity for him to learn the classroom behavior that we expect, right? That's part of equity for me. Like, that equity really is not just the statement that everybody belongs, but the classroom pedagogy that says everybody belongs, right? Because if I silence that kid for yelling damn, I have silenced his anticipation for this book we're about to read. I have silenced his excitement about the content. I have silenced his inquisitive nature. So how do I amplify those things while putting him on the proper path for a 6th grade class, for a 6-year-old's classroom, right? Yeah. And so.
Wow. Like, that is such a great example of what Kass like introduced. Like, it really does show. I want to dig into that belonging, a little bit more, because when we think about it, obviously, like, that teacher obviously is someone that I would love to meet and would love like to learn from and grow from. But if you think about like a new teacher, right, who is just trying to make their way through, right? And that kid yells, damn, right? What can we do as leaders to prepare a teacher to respond in such a way to ensure that they're being equitable, number one, and that we're, instead of like, again, putting up a barrier, really opening up the space for that child?
Yeah. The question that I always ask myself, and I am training myself to be better at this, like, right, so many classroom decisions are impulsive, right? And I think that word impulse, we need to explore the word impulse, because impulse comes from what is practiced over time, right? And so, for example, if I am a football player, we're recording this podcast right after the Super Bowl, right? I don't know who's going to throw the ball in my direction. I don't know who's going to try to tackle me. But if I practice the ball being thrown in my direction during the week, if I practice dodging people when they try to tackle me during the week, when that split-second decision has to happen, in that impulsive moment, I can make that decision because I've practiced it ahead of time, right? And so people say, oh, it was the heat of the moment, it was an impulse, and so I just did what I did. I didn't mean to. But impulse is just who you really are. Impulse is what you practice beforehand. So if I want to be welcoming for kids, despite what their classroom behaviors might be, I got to practice that, right? And so, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, Dr. Cheryl, I am a teacher educator. So I work with a lot of very brand new teachers. So people who are pre-service, in-service, or people who have full-time teaching positions and alt-cert programs. And one of the things that they constantly report to me is they're just like, Kass, nobody prepared me for the children. We talk a lot about like the what to teach,
right?
Like, here's the instruction, but like the how, like how to be is something that is like not really explored, beforehand. And so I always think about this framework, especially with school leaders, and how we can formulate areas of practice for us to really prepare teachers for what it's like when kids are presenting all this kind of stuff, whether it be the first grader who's cursing or, the 11th grader who simply like does not show up to school.
Right.
So I think we can be really proactive. And so something that's kind of lost in schools is like this idea of like studying and anticipating together. So what does that really look like? I know Cornelius is reading The Anxious Generation with the school that he's working at, and the teachers are getting so much out of that because it's really helping them understand proactively like what is triggering or what is making students like do the things that they're doing. Because the other two parts of this sort of framework I think about is responsive, which is generally the area that most of us are working in because, can't study everything all the time. There's simply not how like school is structurally situated. And then there's like the reactive space. And unfortunately, when people are exhausted, when they're not given areas to study their practice, and people aren't talking to them about what's hard and giving them like a container to really be authentic and unpacking what's been difficult for them, a lot of people, unfortunately, are ending up in this really reactive space. And that's the space that we want to avoid, right? We don't want to scream at 5-year-olds who are still working out like a lot of their own impulse control, right?
Indeed.
So we have to do a lot of work on our own and just really re-engage in that anticipatory study together to prevent those kinds of negative impulses from happening.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think there's so much said about, practice makes permanent, period, and
Yeah.
we're either intentionally practicing or unintentionally practicing. So either way, we're building habits is what you're saying. So I think that's fantastic. Now, Cass, you mentioned this kind of, I call the other teacher, the classroom, right? You mentioned it as being this beautiful space. What are some of the quiet or unintended ways classrooms communicate who belongs and who's expected to either adapt or maybe even disappear?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. And I love that you're asking that because it is true, right? The classroom does function as this sort of personified thing that can do, or, inevitably is going to be teaching, and how we wield that power is really, up to the community of people that's within that space.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that I, try to sort of like shake up, I remember one time I ran a workshop called Shaking Up the Classroom. And part of it was getting rid of this idea that anything has to be permanent or rigid. And so, baseline is that we really have to undergird the shape, the setup of our classroom with this idea of flexibility. And also like that idea of anticipating, who's going to be having a rough day today? Cornelius does this really beautiful work about helping teachers explore the liminal spaces in school, like the hallway before the classroom or the cafeteria in between, math. And then after they get back, like another period of math, those are going to be two really different experiences. And so I think the first part of it is really being having this purview that your classroom is malleable. Like you can move your kids around in the middle of class, and that's totally fine. We don't have to have things like lockstep. It doesn't need to be super quiet. What we want is that buzzy kind of learning that we talked about earlier, where teachers feel okay about redirecting children's experiences in ways that really speak to their needs.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think about in very practical terms, so for all of our listeners who are classroom teachers, I think about one thing that communicates very loudly who belongs here and who doesn't is where I put my attention and how I pay attention. So for example, if Dr. Cheryl, if you answer a question right and I say good job, right? And then Cass answers a question right and I say good job. The student who's not sure if they have the right answer is starting now to feel excluded. And so one of the things that I've even started paying attention, I pay attention differently. So, right, if you, Dr. Cheryl, if you answer a question right, I will say, I like how you took that risk. And then if Cass answers a question right, I'll be like, ooh, Cass, I saw you struggling there, and I just really love how you stayed with the struggle. And so now the kid who doesn't feel like they have the perfect answer is like, oh, he is rewarding people who stay with the struggle. He's rewarding people who take a risk. And so I have shifted how I pay attention.
Of
Right.
course.
So even if I am looking for accuracy or looking for the right answer, what I talk about in my attention paying so the students can hear me is I talk about their commitment to struggle or their commitment to taking academic risk or their commitment to outgrowing themselves. And that way they see, oh, those are the things that he compliments and I can be that. I don't feel perfect, but I can be the person who outgrows myself, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so how we pay attention, I think matters. And so I've been very specific about my language in the classroom that I don't want to always be pointing at the things that feel exclusive.
Yeah.
I want to point at the things that feel universal. And so if you get an answer right, me saying, great work, perfect, Dr. Cheryl, feels exclusive to some students in the room. But me saying, Dr. Cheryl, the way you took that risk and tried that answer when you didn't know if it was going to be right or wrong,
Right.
that's what I love to see. And so the
Yeah.
next kid is going to now raise their hand,
Right.
even if they don't know their answer is right or wrong,
That's right.
because
They want to
I,
be in it.
yeah,
They want to be
yeah,
part of it.
They
yeah,
do. I mean,
Yes.
yeah,
every child wants to be part of it. And
yeah,
it's so important to remember. And it
yeah,
reminds me of Dr. Carol Dweck's work, right? Where we know
yeah,
we are not
yeah,
focusing on being perfect. We are really, really
yeah,
focusing on that growth
yeah,
mindset. And growth means that we don't always
yeah,
get it right, but that we
yeah,
don't give up the struggle, if you will. So
yeah,
that's powerful. I remember one of my first times actually going in to
yeah.
support a teacher, and she
Wow.
had said to me, I said, what do you want me to look for today? How would you like me to
Yeah,
support you today? And she said, I just don't think I'm getting to like these two kids over here. For some reason, we're just not
yeah,
connecting. And I said, okay, great. And I had gone to this seminar where I was learning to track where teachers are walking. And
yeah,
literally, I tracked that she never ever gave them her face,
yeah.
always her back,
Wow.
never looked towards them at all, ever. And when I
Wow.
just showed her her pattern of how she was moving in the classroom, she just
Yeah,
wept because I didn't even realize I was doing that. And I said,
yeah,
well, it may have been intentional or unintentional. We don't know. But
yeah,
like at the end of the day, this is something very easy that you can do. You're being intentional about where you move, right? So not just what
yeah,
you say, but who are you standing next to, right?
yeah.
Who are you giving eye contact to?
Hmm.
That says a lot, right? That's fantastic. When I think about, we presented at NABE this week, and we were excited to be there and talking about how to support our bilingual and multilingual learners. And how to write. We have this new awesome writing curriculum called Building Writers, Cornerstones, which is great. Building Writers. So right up Cass's alley, who is a maker of things, right? So, but when I think about that, we often ask our students to show their thinking, to show their ideas, their feelings, in writing. But, what happens to belonging when a student has all these rich ideas? But whether English is their second, third, or fourth language or their first language, they struggle to get those ideas in sentences. So what can we do to support those kinds of students?
Interesting. My immediate reaction, a response when I think about writing sentences is just, like you said, Dr. Schull, it's so painful for so many students. And even, folks like ourselves, I know I'll speak for myself right now. I'm composing a very big, long thing right now. And sometimes even still, it feels quite painful to compose sentences. And when I really unpack the why, like where does that pain come from? It's because I haven't spent enough time thinking about it and really knowing my idea. And I wonder, a question that I often pose in lots of different school spaces I occupy is like, how much time are we really spending like supporting children's thinking, their ideation, before we give them the paper and the pencil and tell them to write? And yes, absolutely, like writing can be thinking,
Right?
but also like thinking can be thinking, right? And so we're
Yeah.
going to put onus on the most integral part of our work, which is really helping children understand that they are makers of their own thoughts and ideas, and what they have to say matters. And yes, absolutely, like writing is part of that work. But I think part of the pain comes from they haven't spent enough time really like knowing what they want to say before we hand them the paper and the pencil.
Oh,
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
so true. I feel like while it might be a long t-shirt, I feel like it needs to be on a t-shirt for sure.
yeah,
But, maybe we can shorten it to like, thinking is thinking, and, that
yeah,
we really need to give our children time. But
yeah.
not just our children. Who else do you think we need to give our teachers time to think, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes. Yes.
Oh man. And
Yeah,
I think about when I do professional learning for anyone, and let's say I do a reflective activity, it's so powerful for me to say, I want you, it's your thinking job. I want you to take some time to think about it. And you can see people going like, really? And then to then give them some time to talk about it, right? With their neighbor, with their table, with their group, and then to write about it. I find that then they're able to go to the paper more confident. And these are people who know how to write their letters well. These are people who
Yes.
know how to construct juicy, strong sentences. So imagine children who do not, and we don't give them all those opportunities to think and then to talk and then to write.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think about that, Cornelius?
I think about that all the time. I mean, that is the heartbeat of my work. And I think um, one philosophy that Cass and I organize around is the idea of universal design for learning, right? And so we know that writing is a singular method of expression, right? And so Cass and I believe in multiple means of expression, right? That kids can express their thinking in
Yeah,
so many different ways. Writing is often the standardized measurement, but if I truly want to know what a kid thinks, there's so many different ways that a kid can express that. And so I'm always wanting to engage teachers and young people in how are we speaking across the day? How are we performing across the day? How are we illustrating or building models across the day? And so that way, when it comes to doing a writing task, the writing task might be the third or fourth time that I've had to express this idea. And
yeah,
so now my words are clearer. I've built the model, I've drawn the picture, I've acted it out, and so I'm often thinking about that. But then I also am a huge believer in growth over time, right? The power of that word yet, that the kid might not be at sentence yet. But if we're not at sentence yet, let me be really clear about my measurement. Where are we? Okay, this is the child who can write 2 words. Mama said. Okay, you got mama said. Like it's not the exact sentence I want, but you got 2 words right now. So then how do I turn you tomorrow into the kid who can give me 3 words?
right,
Right? And then
right,
after that, how do I turn you into the kid who can give me 4 words and a period at the end? And then
yeah,
after that, how do I turn you into the kid who can capitalize, give me 4 words and a period at the end? So I might not get the sentence I want today or even tomorrow, but how am I intentional in my record keeping and in my expectations so that I'm
yeah,
growing you over time, right? And so
yeah,
some people come and they'll say to me, "Oh, that kid isn't writing a sentence in your class. What you gonna do about it?" Well, nothing today. Today I'm gonna move him from 1 word to 3 words. But then by next week, when you come back, we gonna have 5 words with a period at the end,
yeah,
right? And I think that really matters. I'm working with a lot of new Americans right now, and we've got some young folks who are at 0 words, and I'm working with their principal. And one of the things that was really interesting is the kids went from no words on the paper to illustration of an idea
yeah,
in about a week. And I'm like, that's big. All right, so we had
yeah,
no words. I'm sitting in my silent phase at my desk. I'm not engaging with the class. To a week later, I'm not engaging with the class, but I'm listening to what the teacher is saying and illustrating my idea in response.
yeah.
That's massive progress in 4 instructional days. And
Hmm,
so, wanting teachers to see these kids are not writing sentences yet, but that does not mean we have failed in our instructional mission, right? That these
exactly.
4 days have been well spent, right? We have
Yeah,
made some measurable academic progress. And then 4 days from now, how are we illustrating and then maybe labeling with
right.
1 or 2 words in English, right? And so really thinking about what progress looks like and what measurement looks like. It's really important
What
for the classroom.
progress looks like and what measurement looks like. Love that.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I think that we, as an educational system, we're so
yeah,
quick to label our students, right? That they don't
yeah,
know it yet. They can't speak it yet. They can't write it yet. They're unmotivated. They're behind.
yeah,
They're challenging, right?
yeah,
Which is all, as we know, deficit thinking, right?
yeah.
What questions should educators be asking before we make those kinds of judgments about children, especially when it comes to reading and
Yeah.
constructing sentences and even just
Hmm.
handwriting?
Yeah.
What should they ask?
Mm.
Baseline, I
Yeah.
think we really need to ask ourselves, what does this mean? What does this label mean really for our practice?
Hmm.
What does it mean and how does it matter for the
Yeah.
instructional decisions we're making about our students? So, for example, there's so many labels, right? Whether it be standardized test scores, like how many times have we heard people refer to my twos, my threes, my high leverage students, right?
Or
Or
my bubble kids, my bubble kids.
Oh my gosh.
hires.
Yeah.
Also, one
Right.
that I personally can't stand or is when people do high, medium, low groups, like there are these shorthand terms or singular numbers and words we use to lump entire, groups of children together. And what I have found when I do this work a lot of really helping people see children and see their work through strength-based perspectives and capacity orientations, you know, oftentimes like to label a child as a level 2, like there's not a lot of like clarity on what that actually says a child is able to do.
Right.
Right. And oftentimes the conditions where those, means are generated are not really, cultivating a space where children are able to show what they know. Right. And so taking all those things into consideration, I'm a huge fan of looking at student work together. I love to do a lot of student interviewing. So where we ask students who they are as learners, what do they like to do? Who do they see in their lives as readers? There's so many beautiful ways to understand what children are able to do. And I think we also, have to hold the reality that we are, to an extent, beholden to some of these labels such as grades and, disability classifications and test scores, et cetera. But I don't think, those are the be all end all, nor should they ever be the be all end all in terms of how we define what our students are able to do. And I think it is our moral imperative, really, to do the close up, proximate work of understanding who children are, what they're able to do, and figure out what is within our sphere of influence to, do what we can to make their needs happen in the classrooms we occupy.
I'm really evolving, Dr. Cheryl, a lot in my own leadership and coaching. And one of the things that I have been doing this year is I do not allow people to use labels if they cannot describe the action that they're going to take in order to grow a student's capacity. So if you're going to use the label low, what needs to come right after that is your action that you're going to be taking to grow a student's capacity. And so every label, if a label isn't attached to some accountability or action, it's a slur, right?
Wait. I want to pause right there for just a second.
Yeah.
Say that one more time, please.
That if a label is not attached to some real accountability and action, it's a slur. Like if I just say you're a low reader, but it's not attached to what I am going to do to grow your capacity, then that's a slur. Yeah.
There's an activity we have people do to exercise their understanding around what children are able to do. And I call it my strength-based taboo game. So essentially, you have to write a description of your student, and I have all these, deficit labels. So all of the high, medium, low, struggling, low test scores, I quote unquote IEP kids. I don't like to use that language. I advocate for person first language, so students with IEPs, right? SPED kids, we don't use that. And so through that exercise, teachers cross out all of they're not allowed to use any of that language. And so what it does, it incites, this exercise where people are really forced to understand either what they don't know about their kids or really just be super thoughtful. And it generates some really wonderful descriptions of what students are able to do. And from there, like all learning works, right? Like we build within their zone of proximal development. So then we're able to design some like really great tier 1 or even tier 2 instruction based off what we know people can do. And then we can also think about what assessments are required to find that information, to figure out that information that is not, yet within our realm of understanding. So whether that be the interview or whether that be, a short writing assessment or even like, bringing the parents in just to have a conversation about, family and culture and life. Like all of those things help us, be in community with our students and also really help us understand who they are and what they need.
Yeah. I did Kass's activity. We're in New York City, and one of my favorite schools in the universe is Tompkins Square Middle School in Manhattan. And I've been working with the students there for a long, long time. And we did some of that work around person first language and not using deficit language to describe kids. And we were working with a group of young men, and one of the teachers was like, well, he's the one that don't ever talk. And after we did the activity, we landed at, he's the one who needs about 30 seconds before he can answer the question. And so then we asked, well, what does that mean for our practice? So that means then when we ask the question, we give kids about 30 seconds of wait time. and then more kids are willing to talk. And so being able to see kids through these fresh lenses has direct implications on our practice, right? That we went from, oh, this is the one who won't ever talk. Whenever we ask a question, he'll never got nothing to say. And when we really kind of thought about it, we were like, oh, he does have something to say. We just got to give him about 30 seconds. Yeah.
Right.
And so, yeah, and it's just a powerful group of teachers there who have really kind of dived headfirst into this kind of practice. Yeah.
This is so powerful.
Yeah.
And this entire time, I always think of myself, if you've listened to any episodes, I always think of myself first as a student and then as a teacher and then as a leader and then as a parent. And I just think about the labels that likely teachers may have had for me. And I'm so grateful to those teachers who saw beyond those labels and to see exactly what I was capable of, and then gave me the space to show up and to be who I am. Otherwise, I don't know that I would be who I am today. Like I also think it's important to think about us as humans. Like we have an opinion, right? We have a thought about who's in front of us. And sometimes those thoughts aren't good, even about children, right? But we have to check ourselves always and make sure that we are aligning them in a way that's going to move students in a positive direction. Yeah, that's so, incredibly powerful. I'm really, really, really appreciate those responses. Do you know what I also think about? I also think about the shift that we make when we ask the question, what skills has this student been given, been taught explicitly? Like, I think about something like handwriting, for example. This kid, I can't read anything they write. And then to leave it there, right? This kid has bad handwriting. The question I ask, has he ever been taught to handwrite? Has he given an opportunity to write in cursive? Have we given him keyboarding lessons, right? Like that's my, what do you think shifts when we ask ourselves questions like, have we explicitly taught the child this thing or given them the space to practice this? Yeah.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is just how intense teachers or how intense the curriculum teachers are working with typically is, and how there's a lot of pressure to sort of like push through curriculum. And one of like a powerful activity that Cornelius and I often engage in with teachers is doing a little bit of a curriculum analysis, right? Where we really think about what is the content, what are the habits children need to know, and what are the skills that are present in this curriculum? Because oftentimes everybody's doing all the things all at once, which is fine, all right? However, what we know is that students often have not yet developed the kinds of habits necessary to, learn the content, and they haven't necessarily developed the skills in order to exercise whatever task is at hand, right? And so we as teachers need to understand, like, well, what is the direct instruction that we need to either learn or implement to teach the skills? Where are we finding space in our day to do like the socio-emotional work required for children to really like learn the habits and then practice them? And where are we holding them accountable? And in terms of the content, earlier I said, I don't ever ask people, I try not to ask people, particularly students, to do things that I haven't yet done myself. Right. And so really exercising, even if it's first grade material, like to be a child for 6 hours across a day is such an intense experience.
Yeah.
So if I'm really thinking about what it means to be any human, no matter how old you are, and do school from the beginning of the day to the end, learn this content, learning these new skills or exercising these skills, and I'm trying to like be a good person, and I'm trying to learn how to share with my classmates. It's a lot, right? So thinking about how can we think about these areas, skills and content and habits separately, so we understand what it is our work can be and what we need to learn, particularly around direct instruction, I think is like a big deal. right? And then also like the habits. I think sometimes like teaching kids habits falls under weight. There's a lot of like, well, they should know how to be nice. Well,
Yeah.
they're human. They're
Right.
human. Sometimes we have to teach into that. What does
Yeah.
that look like? I think it's really exciting work. And, Cornelius and I are also, I think more so now than ever, just keenly aware of how hard it is to hold all of these things at once. It's a lot. And we try to give people a lot of grace when we're thinking about what it really means to build the skills of a teacher who, knows how to hold content habit skills all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's so critical. And I just have a couple more questions for you that I think would be great if that's all right. Um, and that is that, you guys have mentioned, especially you, Cornelius, you've mentioned a lot about like the struggle, right? And so I think when you think about teaching, we all believe that high expectations are really critical and important to have for all of your students. And then, of course, we also know we want students to have well-being, right? But I think that sometimes our high expectations and well-being really there's a tension between the two. And then, of course, you have the R word, rigor, right? How do you define rigor in a way that really supports real learning without confusing struggle with suffering or
Yeah,
compliance, right? What exactly
absolutely.
is the difference, especially when you think about like reading and writing?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think about rigor all the time, right? Like all the time in everything that I do. And I always want to remind people that really at the heart of rigor is rewarding engagement with complex topics and ideas.
Mm.
That I want young people to have rewarding engagement with complex topics and ideas.
Huh.
So, and I always lead with that because rigor does not mean hard.
Right,
Rigor does not mean stuff that white people at universities like.
right.
Rigor does not mean stuff that like people read 400 years ago. Rigor means meaningful engagement with complex topics and
Mm.
ideas. And so I want kids to have the kind of thinking experiences, the kinds of social experiences, the kind of reading and writing experiences that are meaningful, right? And so what that means is, and I tell, for example, I can read with second graders and we can read, let's say, Jacqueline Woodson, or we can read, some Phil Bender. We can read all those things in really complex, thoughtful ways where
Yeah.
we're thinking about social issues and we're thinking about like motivation and we're thinking about connections and we're thinking about how words are formed and patterns of sentences. We can read picture books in these incredibly rigorous ways. Similarly, I can bring in Shakespeare and we can read Shakespeare in completely non-rigorous ways.
Yeah.
Where if I'm just asking you to identify the names of characters and the places and who said what, that is a completely non-rigorous engagement
Right.
with text, right? And
Right.
so I'm always wanting kids to have these experiences with text that are intellectually demanding, right? That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that they have to be hard, right? That doesn't mean that it has to like be about suffering. That doesn't mean, I have been in love with this week. Me and all the kids have been talking about the Bad Bunny halftime Super Bowl performance, right?
Yes. Yes.
And we've been having these really powerfully rigorous like conversations. Like, one young person, this was Super Bowl's on Sunday. I was in school on Wednesday, and this one young person said, like, and he said this out loud to like the whole table. He was just like, Bad Bunny's from Puerto Rico. I'm from Nigeria, but we all got the same grandmother. He was like, when I saw that grandmother on the field and how he represented that grandmother, and this other kid then turned to him and was like, what you mean? You Nigerian, he Puerto Rican, how y'all got the same grandmother? And then the
Right.
kid had to explain it, and so like that was rigorous engagement, right?
Mm.
Like understanding that this grandmotherly energy felt universal to that young man. Now he
Yeah.
didn't use those words, but he
Right.
was like, I saw that grandmama, and that's just like my grandmama, and hear all the ways that they are like, and then to hear all of the other kids at the table weigh in on that, that was rigor, right? And so as a teacher, I have to understand, I'm not going to silence that conversation. That's actually not distracting conversation.
No.
Right? You know,
Dr. Cheryl, can I ask Cornelius a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to know, so what is it called? What would we call it when there's like, okay, let's say they're reading War and Peace, Tolstoy.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
They're in 10th grade. They're doing this like really hard text.
Yeah.
And yet, the teacher is giving them questions, like you said, that are like recall or, plot-based questions, etc.
Yeah.
What is that called? Like, what terminology would we use to describe the phenomenon where kids are reading a hard text, but the work is not challenging their mind? Do we have a term for that? Or maybe Dr. Cheryl. I'm just thinking about, I want to be able to say what that is, because I don't like it.
It's funny. Like Dr. Cheryl, I went to FAMU, and one of the things that they teach us at the great Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University is we would learn all of these skills for being in the world. And so my senior year, I would go to these business dinners with my professors to prepare me for life beyond college.
Okay.
And I had a professor who said to me, we were all eating steak or something really fancy. And I remember taking out the ketchup. And I had a professor who was like, you don't put ketchup on expensive meat. Like, that's just, I'm 21 years old, getting ready to graduate from school.
Right.
And he was like, you about to be out here in the world with people who have high expectations of you. And
Right.
when you're at a dinner like this, you don't put Heinz ketchup on expensive meat. And I feel like asking low-level questions of Tolstoy is like putting ketchup on expensive meat. Like
Terminology, Dr. Cheryl. It's ketchup on expensive meat when we see teaching and learning like that.
Yeah, but he was just like, nah.
It is hilarious. I love that.
Yeah, but he stopped me. He was like, look, these steaks cost over $40.
Right.
You don't sit down at a business dinner and then pull out the ketchup for your $40 steak. He was like, that's not what this is. This ain't McDonald's. But I had to learn that lesson, right? Like, I had to learn that lesson, and so I feel like when we sit down with these brilliant, powerful texts, but then we water them down with questions that are not worthy of a kid's time or intellectual energy,
Right.
we are putting ketchup on steak,
Yeah. And I think that also goes back to like almost belief. Like,
it's like, is this worthy of my time? Yeah.
Right. But you also then need to make sure that really expensive steak is also juicy.
Yes.
And it's also cooked the way that I like it, which might be different than the way that Kass likes it or the way that Cornelius likes it. Like, I also think the preparation in that steak is critical, because just saying that a steak is expensive means nothing. Because I can go to my little cheap store over here and get a different cut of meat that's a little less expensive. Right.
Yeah.
And I can season that bad boy up.
That's right.
And we can all have a feast. And I love that conversation around that. But like, I also know that like I can have some really rich engagement with something that's not as expensive.
Exactly. And that's what's so important.
Yeah. Unpacking rigor in this way is so integral, because we often come up with, so the reason why I ask that question is because oftentimes like people will be like, well, my child should be doing like this, algebra 2, and they'll be like in, 6th grade. It's like, why? Why do we want that? Why does this public perception of challenge and rigor evolve around like the $80 steak?
Right.
Like, why not focus on, a delicious, like you said, other cut of meat that is beautifully prepared and well-intentioned, and you've asked everybody like how they want their steak cooked, and you have different seasonings. Like that's the beauty of like a rigorous, not just rigorous, but also like inclusive and equitable experience where everybody gets to experience challenge that is appropriate for them.
I love it. And you know what I love? That we just took this food analogy and we just went running with it. That's what I do.
I'm here for it.
Foodie.
Absolutely.
I'm here for it. Yeah.
So, I've gotta talk about our teachers because one of the things that's interesting is that we talk about we must have a classroom that's inclusive and where students feel belong, like they belong, and we need to be affirming, and we also need to teach explicitly, and we need to be systematic, and we have to have high expectations, and then we've got to do that with all these kids and turn in all of these documents and do all of these things and have all of these duties. Like teaching is really complex, sacred work, right? Really complex, sacred work. So when I think about that, educators are human too. And I'm a Danielson framework specialist. And sometimes I hear teachers refer to themselves as I'm a 3 and I'm a 4, or why'd you give me a 2? So that same concept of labeling, right? What can we do to really elevate the profession in a way that teaching is sustainable and fun for teachers again, that where again they're still making a difference. They're doing all the things that we know makes a rich learning environment for every child. What can we do for them to make them feel affirmed?
This
Yeah.
is, my current research is really focusing around teachers becoming. Like, how do we start? Like, how do we start in our work? Why are we the way we are? And I think something that I'm discovering that I don't think is widely accepted in the realm of teacherhood is that teaching is very much alive. And what I mean by that is, traditionally we think of teaching as like this static thing where, you start teaching and ostensibly you get better the more years of experience you have, and you go to your PDs, or you get your credential.
Right.
And you're supposed to be like about it or like have it discovered or know what's going on. But really, like when you think about teacherhood, it's not linear. It's circuitous. It's like a journey that's ebbing and flowing. It's
Right.
a journey where, I remember my hardest year teaching was not my first year teaching. My hardest year teaching was the year I had our first child and had to come back to work, and there's a sense of like, you feel like a part of you is dormant in the classroom. There are all of these really humanistic elements to our becoming and our development. And I don't think that is necessarily honored in a lot of, teacher professional learning or development spaces. And so I think what we should do to sustain teacherhood and to support teachers' well-being is to really honor, the celebratory aspects of our work, the really challenging aspects of our work, and those really dark and hard places of our work that very few people feel safe, are comfortable, or even have the skills to communicate to other people in terms of how they're showing up in their classroom.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can underscore this really organismic, it's an alive, multifaceted experience, and understanding that doesn't necessarily come in like a PD package necessarily. It's, how do we, more of us, grow into this state of being where we understand that, some years, days, months are really, really hard. Some years are super celebratory, and it's so important that we are plugged in and connected to communities that hopefully are working towards trust.
Yeah. And I think the way we get to that, Cass, is we always have to remember our why. That's something huge for me.
Yes.
You guys do a lot of PD, so I know that you've probably gone into a space where you're setting up, getting ready, and they're having some kind of a staff meeting ahead of time, and then they're being told all the things that they can no longer do, or all the things that that's really not great. They're getting some really bad news, and then you have to stand before them, right? And I remember that happening to me, and being like, oh my God, like the air was sucked out of the space. How do I then go in and motivate these teachers, right? And to learn whatever it is I'm presenting. And I remember just taking the time and telling them a story about a student that made a difference in my life and who I think I've made a difference in their life. And that Aubrey is always my why, or at least was my why when I was teaching. And I always remembered that. And I actually had them go to that student or teacher, because they were leaders as well in the space, that they made a difference in, and to write that experience. What did they do? What did you do? How did it make you feel? And all of a sudden I could feel the energy kind of going back up in the space, because we don't do this for the paycheck. We don't do this for the glory. We do this because we genuinely want to support students, and we can get jaded. We can feel like we don't matter, that we're just, that we're not appreciated. And that little teacher appreciation week is not going to do it.
Yes, yes.
Last long.
No, we love it. I'm glad that it's there, but it's not the only thing. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So, Cornelius, do you want to say something at all about that?
I just want to remind folks too that I'm a huge believer in technical fixes. I'm here for the feel goods. I'm here for the inspiration, for the vision, but also we need a practical roadmap. And so I am always wanting to lay out for people, here's the practical roadmap. And when I think about how we maintain our professionalism as teachers and how we always keep our eyes on the prize. Part of it too is recognizing that we can't do all the things, and when we can be really strategic about what we're saying no to. I sat with the department at the beginning of the school year, and I went with them, and we went through all the state expectations together. We're in New York. New York has very clearly written state expectations. So we outlined them all on chart paper. We then thought about the school and community expectations. We added those to the chart paper. And I showed my team. I was like, it is 2 days before the first day of school. We have outlined all of the state expectations. We've outlined all the school and community expectations. For us to reach all of these expectations, it's going to take us 217 days. And there are 180 days of school. So we need to figure out right now, before day one, what we say a no to. That we're going to say no to some of these things because we can't do all of them. We have outlined 217 days worth of content, and it's 180 days of school. We didn't even think about picture day. We didn't even think about them crazy days when they can't go outside because it's snowing. Right. So right now, before the first day of school, we need to look at this list, and we need to remove things from this list that we are just not going to do. And everybody was like, well, we can't take that off the list. That's mandatory. Or we can't remove that off the list because that's the tradition. And I'm like, we have to figure out what we're going to say no to, or we're going to be crazy. Like, this is 217 days worth of content for a 180-day school year. So our state has said, here's your 217-day mandate, even though we know y'all only got 180 days.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
And it was very hard for my team to be like, well, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. And I had to tell them, I'm doing this for your sanity. I don't want nobody cursing before spring break. And so we're going to be really strategic about what we're saying no to. And then it is my job as a leader in the community then to protect us. Right. And so when somebody comes around and they're like, why isn't your school doing this? I can be like, well, we decided before the first day of school that we weren't going to do that because that wasn't one of our priorities. But so we need leaders who are willing to step up and do that work. And then we need people who are committed to task enough to be excellent at all the other things. Because then I had to tell my team, so we got to be excellent at everything else. Because we know somebody going to knock on our door come June talking about why you didn't do this.
That's right.
And so if I got your back and I'm saying we didn't do this for X, Y, and Z reason, you need to have been excellent in everything else. Right.
That's
And so we protect each other, and that's how we stay sane. Right.
Yeah.
And
I just want to say really quickly, as I'm listening to Cornelius describe, how we support school districts and school leaders and teachers in supporting teachers, a big part of what he's describing is our pedagogy, right? Which is really like quality over quantity. Like, choose what you're going to do and do that thing really well. So nobody can say boo about it, right? And that is literally like how both Cornelius and I came up. Like, I mean, y'all are quite familiar with New York City public schools, lots of different chancellors, mandates across the years. And I think, for both me and Cornelius, we really were able to keep our eyes on the prize, which was always like our students. Our students, and we were very clear on our own commitments and our own teacher beliefs, which was really that, we want our children to believe that they are, holders of their own futures and that they have the ability to carve their own paths. And I think that same philosophy and pedagogy really applies to, how we support, everybody from superintendents to groups of teachers, to groups of paraprofessionals, to even, to an extent, like the parents that are part of our school communities as well.
Yeah.
That's so powerful, Kass. I love that. So as we close, I have one final question for you. We've been talking a lot about equity. We've been talking a lot about, how to better support our students. I'd like to kind of focus specifically on equity and in our daily practice, right? And I'd love for you to empower our listeners. Share one small shift you think that they could make tomorrow, right? But I really want you to hone in from a literacy perspective, right? So if they could make one small shift tomorrow and how they approach literacy, so that's reading or sentence writing particularly, that would make an immediate difference and really make classrooms more just for students, what would you tell them to do? One small shift.
Yeah. So I already have mine. So mine is going to take them 90 seconds. And this is something I ask people to do all the time. So I'm asking you to invest 90 seconds twice a week. And so I'm asking for a total of 3 minutes of your time. And really, I'm not asking it for you, I'm asking it for your students. And so for 90 seconds tomorrow, ask a child how they're doing. And then listen for 60 seconds. Don't say nothing. Don't editorialize. Don't add your 2 cents. Ask a child how they're doing and listen. And if they don't fill the 60 seconds, smile at them for 60 seconds. Just that they have an adult's full gaze and attention for 60 whole seconds, 1 minute. So ask a child, how you doing, Dr. Cheryl? I ain't seen you since yesterday. I miss you. I'm so glad you're in school. Tell me, how are you? And then I just sit there for 60 seconds, making loving eye contact with you. It's 1 minute of my time, and that 60 seconds does so much for a child. But then here's the remaining 30 seconds. The remaining 30 seconds is I take out a pencil and a sheet of paper, and I say, oh, Dr. Cheryl, so you said you're feeling good because your grandma came to visit. So I'm going to write a sentence on the paper. My grandmother came to visit. And then I'm going to show you the paper. Did I get your story right? Your grandmother came to visit, and then you point at the words and you'd be like, no, it wasn't my grandma, it was my auntie. Well, can you fix my sentence for me? And so I listen to you 60 full seconds, give you my full attention. And then I transcribe what you say and show you the sentence and give you an opportunity to correct the sentence. And we read the sentence together. So in 90 seconds, I have paid attention to your well-being and to your literacy development. Twice a week is my prescription. You do that twice a week to the student who needs you the most, you will transform your classroom community.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah. All right, Kass, how are you going to, how are you going to blow our minds?
I'm basking in the glow of what Cornelius described because he says do it twice a week for 90 days. Cornelius does it 1,000 times a day for 7 hours a day all the time. I mean, that is literally, I think people often think there's some deep sophistication and, certainly there's a wealth of knowledge there, but a lot of the work is paying attention to kids and liking kids.
Yeah.
A lot of it. And it's just so beautiful to see that practice transform how kids see themselves in literacy. So I would say, to mirror a similar practice, I think teachers also need to engage in a lot of self-reflection. One of my primary beliefs is, our goals, I should say, is that I just want teachers to become reflective practitioners. If we can develop reflective practitioners, we will have done a lot in terms of building equity across the board in school spaces. And so I think a simple way, a very simple practice to develop your reflective capacity is to start microjournaling. And so I know people have feelings about journaling, and I know I too struggle with this, but when I do engage in these practices, it makes an enormous difference when I'm thinking about what is it I'm doing and how well does that match with what I'm trying to do or what my goals are, right? So all that is opening up a Google Doc and it's writing a short reflection about your teaching work. Yeah. How did it make you feel? What's bothering you? What are you proud of? You do that, 3 times a week, every day, 5 days a week if you can, but I know that's a tall order. Do it 3 times a week, and then just hold yourself accountable. You can review it on your own, or ideally with a buddy.
Yeah.
With one other person. It doesn't even have to be in your school. It can be a teaching friend. It could be, even just a good friend who helps you stay accountable to your own commitments to this work and who you are as a human being.
Wow. Super, super powerful. Cornelius and Kass, I knew this was going to be an incredible conversation, a difference-making conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your passion and your expertise, your practical expertise. I thank you so much for all that you do for children, for all that you do for adults. How can our listeners get in touch with you or follow you? Where can they do that?
So we have a website at www.kassandforeign.com. Look for a renewed website here in the near future.
Got it.
We're also on Instagram. So at the Minor Collective, you can find all things about our work. And I would say, both of us have books. You can check out our work. So my book is called Teaching Fiercely, Spreading Joy and Justice in Our Schools. It's available wherever books are sold. And Cornelius has somewhat of a classic at this point that we are still continue to be proud of and is still just as relevant today as it was in 2018 when it was released, called We Got This. Also available anywhere the books are sold.
Wow. Thank you so much. Again, I appreciate you. I'm so honored that you are on the show, and I know this is going to make a difference in so many children's lives.